They thought the flashing lights behind her would make her panic, but Judge Naomi Carter had spent her entire life watching men confuse power with permission. The night had the kind of cold that settled into the windshield and made the city look harder than it was in daylight. All steel reflections and empty intersections. The clock on the dashboard glowing 10:47 p.m. as Naomi guided her black sedan along a quiet stretch of highway just outside Richmond. She had been on the road less than 15 minutes, heading home after a long federal sentencing calendar, her shoulders heavy with the weight of other people's decisions, her mind still half inside the courtroom where truth had spent all day fighting to be heard above procedure. She loosened one hand from the wheel and turned down the radio, letting the silence settle. That was when she noticed the cruiser. It had been behind her for nearly a mile. Then two, keeping the same distance, never passing, never falling back, just sitting there with the patient tension of something waiting for permission to become a problem. Naomi glanced at the speedometer. 5 miles under the limit. Both hands visible. Lane steady. Registration current. Nothing careless. Nothing wrong. And yet the cruiser remained. In America, she had learned, being in full compliance was not always the same thing as being safe. Then the lights came on. Red and blue spilled across her rearview mirror, then across her face, then across the polished leather of the passenger seat like a warning written in color. Naomi exhaled once, slow and controlled, and eased the car onto the shoulder. Gravel crackled beneath the tires. The highway breathed around her in long, distant bursts of passing engines. For a moment she sat still, both hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, posture upright, eyes forward. Calm was not new to her. Calm had been practiced, refined, earned. She had worn it through law school classrooms where professors mistook her silence for uncertainty. She had worn it through courtrooms where men in expensive suits talked over her until she made them listen. She had worn it through every room where her skin entered before her. Credentials did. In the mirror, she saw 2 officers step out of the cruiser. One moved with the swagger of a man who believed the badge on his chest made him the author of whatever happened next. The other hung back half a pace, scanning the car, the road, the darkness beyond the shoulder. Naomi noticed everything. The number on the patrol unit, the angle of the spotlight, the way the first officer adjusted his duty belt before approaching, the pause before his flashlight reached her window. Small things mattered. Small things often became the whole case. The beam slid across the glass, bright and intrusive, then settled on her hands. She rolled the window down halfway. Cold air entered first. Then came the officer's voice, clipped and flat with practiced authority. License and registration. Naomi turned toward him slowly. He was white, mid-40s, broad across the shoulders, his expression already fixed in that familiar blend of suspicion and impatience. As if her presence on this road at this hour demanded an explanation he had every right to collect. She gave him a measured look, not defiant, not submissive, just steady. In the distance, another car passed without slowing. Somewhere far off, a truck horn sounded and faded into the dark. The officer leaned closer to the window and said, with a thin smile that never reached his eyes, "You know why we stopped you tonight?" And in that moment, before a single accusation had been spoken, Naomi understood with chilling clarity that this was no ordinary traffic stop. This was the beginning of a story they thought they were writing for her, never imagining she knew the law well enough to rewrite the ending. Naomi did not answer right away. She reached slowly toward the glove compartment, careful to keep every movement visible, and said in a voice so even it almost made the question sound smaller than it was, "I would rather hear your reason first, officer." The man at her window let out a short breath through his nose, the kind that carried irritation more than amusement. He angled the flashlight toward the center console, then across the passenger seat, then back to her face as if he expected guilt to appear under. "Bright enough light. License and registration, ma'am," he repeated, this time with a harder edge, and Naomi nodded once before opening the compartment and retrieving the documents. Her fingers were steady. Her breathing was steady. But beneath that stillness, her mind had already begun doing what years on the bench had trained it to do. Observe. Separate fact from theater. Notice the sequence. The officer took the papers without thanking her and glanced at them longer than necessary. Naomi Carter. The beam lifted again and settled on her face. Something changed in his expression, not recognition, but resistance, as though her name, her composure, and the quality of the car beneath her hands did not fit the story he wanted. "You heading home from somewhere, Miss Carter?" he asked. Naomi looked past him for half a second and caught sight of the second officer on the far side of the vehicle, moving slowly near the rear bumper, pretending to study the tires. "From work," she said. "What kind of work keeps you out this late?" The question was casual only on the surface. Underneath it sat something older, something sharper. The assumption that a black woman alone at nearly 11 at night in a car like this had to explain how she got there. Naomi let the silence stretch just long enough to make him feel it. "Legal work," she said. His jaw tightened. Behind him, the other officer had moved closer now, just outside her line of sight, his flashlight briefly sweeping the back seat. "You were drifting a little back there," the first officer said. "Crossed the line twice." Naomi knew that was not true. She had been watching her mirrors, her speed, the road, all of it. But she also knew lies often arrived dressed as routine. "I do not believe that happened, officer," she replied. He bent slightly toward the window, his face now clearer under the wash of patrol lights. "Officer Ryan Cole, according to the nameplate on his chest." "Well, I believe it did," he said. "And that is enough for me to ask a few more questions." There it was. Not procedure. Not concern. Control. Naomi felt the cold air brushing her sleeves and heard the hum of traffic in the distance. Each passing vehicle a reminder that witnesses could exist without ever stopping. Officer Cole handed back her registration but kept her license in his hand. "Have you had anything to drink tonight?" he asked. "No." "Any narcotics in the vehicle?" "No." "Any weapons in the vehicle?" "No." He stared at her for a beat too long, then glanced over his shoulder toward the second officer, Derek Shaw, who now approached the passenger side with a look that seemed rehearsed. The two men did not need words. Their timing said enough. Naomi felt it then, not fear exactly, but the unmistakable shape of intention closing in. This stop had not grown suspicious. It had started that way. Officer Shaw tapped lightly on the passenger window and shined his flashlight downward, his brow furrowing as if he had noticed something alarming. "Ryan," he said, loud enough for Naomi to hear, "you might want to take a look at this." The air changed instantly. Officer Cole straightened, all pretense dropping from his face, replaced by something colder and more certain. "Ma'am," he said, stepping back from the window, "I need you to turn off the engine and keep your hands where I can see them." Naomi did not move for 1 second, then 2. Her gaze shifted to the dashboard clock, to the reflection of the patrol lights in the glass, to the dark outline of the interstate camera mounted farther up the shoulder. When she finally lifted her eyes again, there was no panic in them, only recognition. The trap had just revealed itself, and the men outside her car still believed she was the one with nowhere left to go. Naomi turned off the engine and placed both hands back on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed, shoulders square, her face giving them nothing they could use. Outside, Officer Shaw remained near the passenger side, his flashlight angled low now, his posture sharpened by the kind of false discovery that men like him had probably rehearsed more than once. Officer Cole stepped back just enough to widen the distance between them, as though space itself could make his authority look more official. "Ma'am," he said, "I need you to step out of the vehicle." Naomi kept her eyes on him. On what grounds? Her question landed softly, but it landed with weight. Cole did not like that. Men who expected obedience rarely enjoy precision. "We observed suspicious movement inside the car, and my partner has identified what may be contraband in plain view," he said. Naomi let the words settle between them. Contraband in plain view. It was almost elegant in its laziness, the way some lies were built from phrases that sounded more legal the more often they were repeated. She turned her head slightly toward the passenger seat, but could not see what Shaw was pretending to see. Her purse was closed. A folder from Chambers sat neatly on the floorboard. A takeout coffee cup rested in the console, half empty and long cold. Nothing about the inside of that car had changed except the story the officers had decided to tell. "Officer," Naomi said, her voice still calm, "I have not made any suspicious movement, and nothing illegal is in this vehicle." Cole gave a humorless smile. "That is not for you to determine tonight." The sentence hovered in the cold like a threat disguised as procedure. Naomi opened the driver door slowly and stepped onto the shoulder, her heels touching gravel, the red and blue lights moving across the dark fabric of her coat in restless waves. The air smelled faintly of wet pavement and exhaust. Cars passed in the far lanes without stopping, their headlights sliding over the scene and disappearing into the night, each one carrying strangers who would never know how quickly an ordinary drive home could become something else entirely. Shaw was already at the passenger door when Cole guided Naomi a few feet away from the sedan. Not touching her, not yet, but close enough to remind her who believed he controlled the scene. Naomi stood straight, chin level, hands visible at her sides. From a distance, she looked less like a woman being detained than a woman enduring an inconvenience she intended to remember in detail. And that was exactly what she was doing. She noted the time. She noted the order of commands. She noted that neither officer had requested consent to search. She noted that Cole had kept his body turned just enough to block the view of the passenger side from the road. Small things. Always small things. Then Shaw gave a low whistle, the kind designed to sound accidental and convincing at the same time. "Well, that is interesting," he said. Naomi did not move, but every nerve in her sharpened. Shaw straightened beside the open passenger door and held up a small plastic bag between two fingers, turning it just enough for Cole to see in the patrol lights. The performance was almost insulting in its simplicity. Cole took 2 quick steps forward, his voice tightening into instant certainty. "Ma'am, do you want to explain why this was in your vehicle?" Naomi looked at the bag, then at Shaw, then back at Cole. Her expression did not change. "No," she said, because it was not. For one fragile second, something flickered across Shaw's face. Not guilt, not shame, just surprise that she had answered with such clean conviction, as if she already understood every corner of the trap and had no intention of shrinking inside it. Cole recovered first. He squared his shoulders and spoke louder now, louder than the moment required, louder in the way people do when they are trying to convince not only the target, but themselves. "At this point, you are being lawfully detained pending further investigation." Naomi lifted her eyes to his and, in a voice so controlled it almost seemed to lower the temperature around them, said, "Then you should be very careful about what happens next, officer." Cole stared at her, hearing the warning but not yet understanding it. To him, she was still only a black woman on a dark roadside in a nice car, standing alone beneath flashing lights. He had not yet realized that while he was trying to frame the scene, she was already building the case. For the first time that night, the silence around the shoulder felt crowded. It held the hum of distant tires, the pulse of patrol lights, the soft crackle of police radio, and beneath all of it, the tightening pressure of 2 men who believed they had pushed the night too far to turn back. Officer Cole kept his eyes on Naomi as if he expected her calm to finally crack, as if innocence had to look nervous before he would believe it. But Naomi Carter had spent too many years watching truth enter rooms already stacked against it too. Waste energy performing fear for men who had already chosen their fiction. She stood on the gravel with the cold air brushing her face and said nothing. Sometimes silence did more than protest. Sometimes it documented. Shaw lowered the bag into an evidence pouch with the kind of careful motion that was supposed to make the scene feel official. Cole reached for his radio and spoke in clipped, practiced phrases, requesting a supervisor and beginning the process of narrating the lie before anyone else arrived. Naomi listened to every word. He said the item had been observed in plain view. He said the driver had shown unusual tension. He said the vehicle stop had escalated after suspicious behavior. Each sentence came smoother than the last. That was the part that chilled her, not the dishonesty itself, but the familiarity of it, the ease. This was not improvisation. This was habit. A pair of headlights slowed in the far lane, then kept moving. A second car did the same. For a brief instant, Naomi saw her reflection in the passenger window of her own sedan, a black woman standing alone between 2 white officers beneath a wash of red and blue light. And she felt the old American ache beneath the moment, the one that had outlived generations, the one that turned routine authority into a threat depending on who was being watched. Cole stepped closer, keeping his tone official, but no longer bothering to hide the contempt under it. "You understand this is serious, right?" He held up her license between 2 fingers, glancing at it again. "Naomi Carter. Funny thing is, people always act shocked when choices catch up to them." Naomi turned her head and met his stare. "Choices, officer?" The question was quiet, but it cut clean. Shaw looked away first. Cole did not answer. Instead, he asked where she had been earlier that evening, whether anyone could confirm her movements, whether the car was registered in her name, whether she often drove alone this late. None of it was about the bag anymore. The bag had only opened the door. Now came the part they really wanted, the humiliation, the slow reduction of a person into suspicion. Naomi answered only what was necessary. Coming from work. Yes, the car is mine. Yes, I am alone. No, I do not consent to any further search beyond what you have already forced. Cole's expression hardened at that last sentence. Forced, he repeated, letting the words sit in the air with open irritation. You might want to be careful how you describe this encounter. Naomi almost smiled, but did not. She looked past him toward the interstate camera mounted high above the shoulder, its small red indicator light steady in the dark, and then toward the body camera clipped at the center of his chest. Are both recording? She asked. The question landed differently than the others. It was not defensive. It was precise. Shaw shifted his weight. Cole's jaw moved once before settling. Why do you ask? Naomi kept her gaze level. Because details matter. That was when another set of flashing lights appeared in the distance, brightening the highway behind them with a second wave of color. The supervisor was coming. Cole seemed to straighten with confidence, as though backup meant protection. Naomi felt something else entirely move through the night. Not relief. Not yet. Just the quiet certainty that the circle around her was about to widen, and with it, the number of people who would hear exactly what these men had already said out loud. The second cruiser rolled onto the shoulder with a low crunch of gravel and stopped several yards behind the first, its lights folding into the scene until the whole roadside looked drenched in authority. Naomi watched the driver door open and a woman in a supervisor's jacket step out with measured purpose, one hand near her radio, her eyes already taking inventory before she spoke. Captain Elena Brooks was in her early 50s, composed in the way only experience could make a person, not hurried, not casual, just alert. She looked first at Cole, then at Shaw, then at Naomi, and in that brief sweep Naomi noticed something the others had missed all night. Brooks was not assuming. She was assessing. Officer Cole moved quickly to meet her, eager in the way people often are when they need to control the first version of a story. He spoke in a low voice, but not low enough. Traffic violation. Driver acted. Evasive. Possible narcotics recovered from the passenger side in plain view. Brooks listened without interruption, her face unreadable under the flash of red and blue. Then she turned to Naomi. Ma'am, I am Captain Brooks. Are you injured? No. Do you understand why you are being detained? Naomi held her gaze for a second before answering. I understand what they are claiming. That was enough to make Shaw shift again. Brooks looked at the open passenger door, then at the evidence pouch in Shaw's hand, then back toward the interior of the sedan. Her eyes lingered there longer than Cole seemed comfortable with. Naomi could almost feel his impatience rising beside her, the subtle irritation of a man who had expected a simple confirmation, not scrutiny. Brooks asked where the item had been found. Shaw pointed toward the passenger footwell and repeated the phrase plain view with a little too much confidence. Brooks asked who first observed it. Shaw said he did. Brooks asked whether both body cameras were activated before the search began. Neither man answered immediately. It was a small hesitation, less than a breath, but Naomi caught it, and so did Brooks. The night seemed to tighten around that silence. Then Cole said yes. Of course, though his tone had already changed. Brooks looked at Naomi again. Do you wish to make a statement at this time? Naomi stood straighter, the cold air lifting a strand of hair near her cheek before carrying it away. Yes, Captain. I would like it noted that I did not consent to a search, that I was told there was suspicious movement before any basis was explained, and that your officers appear to be constructing probable cause after the stop, not before it. Brooks did not react outwardly, but her attention sharpened. Cole let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, except there was nothing amused in it. Constructing probable cause, he repeated, as if the phrase itself offended him. Naomi did not look at him when she answered. Words matter, officer. Brooks took one slow step toward Naomi. And what is your occupation? Ma'am, the question hung there under the spinning lights, simple on the surface, dangerous underneath. For the first time, all night, Cole seemed genuinely curious. Shaw seemed uneasy. Naomi let the pause breathe, not for drama, but because she understood timing better than either man in uniform. She looked from Brooks to the evidence pouch, then to the interstate camera, then back again. I work in federal court, she said. Cole gave a dismissive nod. Too quick, too careless. Clerk, paralegal, something like that, probably. But Brooks did not move. She kept her eyes on Naomi as if waiting for the rest of the sentence, sensing that the truth standing on the side of that dark Virginia highway was much larger than the story her officers had tried to contain. Brooks held Naomi's gaze for a long second, as if measuring whether the calm in front of her came from confidence or from something much deeper. Around them the highway kept moving, headlights sweeping by in silver streaks, indifferent to the small theater of authority unfolding on the shoulder. Officer Cole folded his arms and shifted his weight, impatience rising off him like heat. He wanted the night to move forward in the direction he had already chosen. He wanted paperwork, charges, a sealed story. What he did not want was delay, and he certainly did not want questions. But questions had already entered the scene, and questions had a way of changing everything. Brooks stepped closer to Naomi, her voice lower now, more deliberate. What do you do in federal court? Naomi answered without hurry. I preside there. The wind seemed to thin for one suspended instant. Cole blinked once, as though he had heard the words but rejected them on arrival. Shaw looked from Naomi to Brooks, and then away, his face tightening at the edges. Brooks did not speak immediately. Preside, she repeated. Naomi nodded. United States District Court. The title itself was never spoken with drama. It did not need drama. It carried its own weight. A federal judge was not made powerful by volume. A federal judge was powerful because the law recognized her voice even when men like Ryan Cole did not. Cole gave a short, disbelieving shake of his head. That is convenient, he said. Anybody can say anything on the side of a road. Naomi turned toward him then, fully, and for the first time that night, there was something in her eyes colder than calm. Yes, officer, they can. That is exactly the problem. Brooks's attention sharpened further. Do you have identification to confirm your position? Naomi inclined her head toward the inside pocket of her coat. In my briefcase on the back seat, there is my court credentials, my judicial identification, and a folder stamped with tomorrow morning's docket. She paused, then added with precise emphasis, assuming your officers have not disturbed the rest of my property while manufacturing probable cause. The sentence landed clean and hard. Shaw looked down. Cole's face darkened. Brooks turned slowly toward the open passenger side of the sedan, then back to Shaw. Did either of you search the rear compartment? Her tone was even, but there was iron underneath it now. No, ma'am, Shaw said too quickly. Cole opened his mouth as if to take control again, but Brooks stopped him with a raised hand before he could speak. She crossed to the vehicle herself, careful where she stepped, and leaned just far enough to look inside without touching anything. Naomi watched her eyes move over the leather seats, the closed briefcase, the neatly stacked case files, the folded black robe garment bag resting in the back. It was not one object alone. It was the total picture. Order. Precision. A life built on discipline. A life that did not match the cheap little story they had tried to pin to it. Brooks straightened and returned. Her expression changed now, not into sympathy, but into something more dangerous for the officers standing beside her. Concern backed by authority. Judge Carter, she said, using the title this time. Were you informed of the basis for the stop before your vehicle was searched? Naomi answered immediately. I was told I had drifted lanes. That was false. Then I was told there was suspicious movement. That was vague. Then an object appeared on my passenger side after Officer Shaw positioned himself where the highway cameras could not clearly see him. Cole took a step forward. Captain, with respect, she is making accusations because she got caught. Brooks turned so sharply toward him that even the flashing lights seemed to pause around the motion. With respect, officer, she is making a record. The words hit harder than a shout would have. Cole fell silent. Shaw stared at the pavement. And in that silence Naomi felt the first real shift of the night. The moment when power stopped being something worn on a uniform and started becoming what it had always been in truth. Credibility, memory, restraint, and the law waiting patiently for its turn to speak. The air after Brooks said it felt different, as if the highway itself had heard her and gone still for half a heartbeat. Judge Carter. The title did not echo, but it did not need to. It moved through the scene like a light switched on in a room where everyone had been pretending not to see. Officer Shaw's hand loosened around the evidence pouch. Officer Cole did not move at all. He stood there with the hard set of a man whose confidence had always depended on other people accepting his version first. But confidence built on assumption is fragile, and the night had just begun to show him how fragile. Brooks stepped back toward the sedan and, without looking at either officer, asked for the briefcase to be retrieved without disturbing anything else in the vehicle. This time her tone left no room for interpretation. Shaw hesitated, then looked to Cole out of habit, not authority. Brooks noticed. "I gave the instruction, officer," she said. Shaw swallowed, crossed to the rear door, and opened it carefully. Naomi watched him lean in and lift the black leather briefcase from the seat with both hands, suddenly aware of how delicate every motion looked when someone knew they were being watched. He carried it over and handed it to Brooks, who set it on the hood of her cruiser beneath the wash of the emergency lights. Naomi stepped forward when Brooks asked permission, entered the code, and opened it. Inside were case files tabbed with precision, a court calendar, a judicial identification card bearing her photograph and title, and a folder sealed with the insignia of the United States District Court. There was no room left for disbelief after that. Brooks picked up the identification, examined it for 2 silent seconds, and then looked at Naomi again, not as a detained driver, not even as a complainant, but as a federal judge standing on the side of a highway after being pulled into something that should never have happened. Under the pulsing lights, Cole's face lost the last of its easy certainty. What replaced it was not remorse. Not yet. It was confusion first, then calculation, the frantic private math of a man trying to determine whether the truth could still be managed if he moved fast enough. "Judge," he began, his tone changing so abruptly it almost sounded unfamiliar in his own mouth. "If there has been some misunderstanding tonight," Naomi turned to him before he could finish. "A misunderstanding is when facts are unclear, officer." This was not unclear. The words landed with no raised voice, no anger, no spectacle. That was what made them so final. Shaw looked down at the pavement as though the gravel might offer him a place to disappear. Brooks closed the briefcase and handed it back to Naomi with careful respect. Then she asked the question neither officer wanted spoken aloud. "At what point did either of you run her identification through dispatch?" Cole opened his mouth, stopped, then said, "We were in the process." Brooks's stare did not soften. Before or after the search, no one answered. Naomi could hear the distant rush of an 18-wheeler rolling past in the outer lane, could feel the cold settling deeper into her coat, could see the red and blue reflections trembling across the windshield of her car like a warning that had finally reached its destination. She had seen this before in court, the exact second when a witness understood the record would not save them because the record itself had become the evidence. Brooks reached for her radio and requested dispatch confirmation on Judge Naomi Carter. The response came back in less than a minute, clear through the static, formal and unmistakable. "United States District Judge." Verified. That was the moment the roadside stopped belonging to Officers Cole and Shaw. Their badges were still on their chests. Their cruiser lights still flashed. Their radios still hissed. But the power had shifted completely. Cole stared at Naomi as though trying to reconcile the woman he had targeted with the authority he now had to face. He had looked at a black woman in a dark sedan and seen someone he could define. Now he was standing under state lights in front of a federal judge who had watched him build a lie one sentence at a time. And for the first time all night, it was not Naomi who seemed trapped. It was him. Brooks did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The authority in the scene had already changed hands, and everyone standing on that shoulder knew it. She instructed both officers to step back from Judge Carter's vehicle and keep their hands off every item until Internal Affairs could review the stop. The words were plain, procedural, almost restrained, but to Ryan Cole they landed like a door shutting somewhere deep inside the system he had always trusted to protect him. For a moment, he looked as though he might argue. Then he saw Brooks's face and thought better of it. Naomi stood beside her sedan with the briefcase held at her side, her coat shifting lightly in the cold wind, her expression composed in a way that made the whole roadside feel smaller around her. She was not triumphant. She was not loud. She simply looked like a woman who had expected the truth to matter eventually and had been patient enough to wait for it. Brooks requested immediate preservation of all body camera footage, dash camera recordings, and dispatch logs connected to the stop. She also asked dispatch to note the interstate camera positioned above the shoulder, and the precise time window from the initial pull over through Supervisor arrival. Every sentence she spoke built a structure that Cole and Shaw could not talk their way around. Naomi listened carefully, hearing the rhythm of accountability taking shape one instruction at a time. It was almost ironic. The same system those officers had tried to use as a weapon was now turning with cold precision in the opposite direction. Shaw stood near the cruiser with his shoulders tight and his gaze fixed somewhere past the highway, as if distance alone could separate him from what had happened. Cole remained more rigid, but the certainty had drained from him. He was no longer speaking like a man in control of a scene. He was speaking like someone trying to find language narrow enough to crawl through. "Captain," he said, "I think this can be clarified in the report." Brooks turned to him slowly. "Clarified is what happens when facts are incomplete," she said. "This is about whether facts were invented." The silence that followed was heavier than anything else that night. Naomi could hear the faint clicking of cooling metal from her engine and the whisper of passing tires on pavement. Somewhere behind the lights and uniforms and radio traffic, she felt something older than the moment itself. It was the memory of every defendant she had seen stand in court with a story no one wanted to believe because the paperwork said otherwise. It was the knowledge that official language had buried truth before and would do so again if no one challenged it. That was why she remained exact. That was why she had watched everything. Brooks asked Naomi whether she needed medical assistance or a ride from another unit. Naomi declined both. What she requested instead was simple. "I would like the names and badge numbers of every officer involved, confirmation that the evidence will be tested for chain of custody, and assurance that no report is filed tonight without preservation of all recordings." Brooks gave a single nod. "You have that assurance from me, Judge." Cole looked at Naomi then, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time all night. Not as a target, not as a suspect, not as a woman he could make small under flashing lights. He was looking at the person who would remember every second of this with judicial clarity. He was looking at someone who knew exactly how institutions failed and exactly how to force them to answer for it. Another patrol unit arrived, then an internal affairs lieutenant on call. Questions began. Timelines began. The roadside that had started as a trap was now becoming a record. Naomi watched the officers move, watched the evidence pouch change hands with care that had been missing when it first appeared, watched Ryan Cole's words grow shorter each time he had to repeat them. Karma did not come crashing down in one dramatic moment. It came the way real justice often did, piece by piece, with witnesses, timestamps, footage, and the slow collapse of a lie that could not survive being seen in full light. By the time the last set of questions had been asked on the shoulder, the night no longer belonged to the officers who had started it. It belonged to the record. It belonged to the timestamps, the preserved footage, the dispatch confirmations, the interstate camera overhead, and the quiet, unshakable memory of Judge Naomi Carter, who had stood through the entire ordeal without once surrendering her dignity to the version of events they had tried to force around her. Internal affairs had separated officers Cole and Shaw from the center of the scene, and that alone said more than any apology could have. There were no dramatic speeches from them now. No swagger. No clipped commands. Just the brittle stillness of men discovering that the system they thought would cover them had instead begun measuring them. Captain Brooks remained steady through it all, moving with the calm precision of someone who understood that accountability was not theater. It was process. She confirmed that Judge Carter was free to leave, then added, with visible seriousness, that the department would be initiating a formal review before sunrise. Naomi thanked her, but her voice carried no satisfaction, only gravity. She had seen too much from the bench to confuse one exposed lie with a healed institution. She knew what happened next would matter more than anything said under flashing lights. Reports would be filed. Footage would be reviewed. Statements would be compared against video, audio, and dispatch timing. If the truth held, and Naomi knew it would, then this stop would not remain an isolated embarrassment on the side of a Virginia highway. It would become evidence of something far more corrosive, something departments often tried to hide behind phrases like discretion and field judgment. Brooks walked with Naomi to her sedan, while another officer documented the untouched interior of the vehicle. The evidence pouch that had appeared so confidently in Shaw's hand earlier now sat sealed and catalogued, no longer a weapon but an exhibit waiting to betray the people who had introduced it. Naomi placed her briefcase back on the rear seat and paused with one hand on the door. The cold had deepened. Midnight was not far off. The highway continued flowing beside them, indifferent and endless, carrying strangers toward homes they would reach without incident, without accusation, without being asked to explain why they belonged in the life they had built. Brooks stood beside her for a moment in the glow of the patrol lights and said quietly, "Judge, I am sorry for what happened here tonight." Naomi looked at her, and when she answered, her voice was soft enough that the words seemed to settle into the darkness rather than cut through it. "I appreciate that, Captain, but what happened to me did not begin tonight." That was the line that remained. Not because it was loud, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Brooks lowered her gaze for a second, hearing in that one sentence the weight of every stop, every assumption, every quiet humiliation that never made it into a report because the person on the receiving end did not have a title anyone respected. Naomi got into her car, closed the door, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. Ahead of her, the road stretched black and shining under the distant lamps. In the mirror, she could still see the cruisers, the uniforms, the people now left to answer for what they had done. She did not smile. She did not look back for long. Some forms of justice did not need celebration. They only needed to be allowed to work. When her sedan finally pulled away from the shoulder, it did so quietly, steadily, without drama, disappearing back into the Virginia night with the same control she had carried through every minute of the stop. Behind her, the officers remained where the truth had left them, no longer protected by assumption, no longer hidden by procedure, forced at last to stand inside the very scrutiny they had tried to manufacture for someone else. And somewhere beyond that cold stretch of highway, beyond the reports and the cameras and the investigations that would follow, the deeper lesson remained. Like an echo that refused to fade, they saw a black woman behind the wheel and assumed they had found an easy target. But the law does not belong to the loudest badge in the dark, and on that night, the woman they tried to frame was the one person in the entire scene who knew exactly how justice was supposed to look.